people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Welcome to Planet America. Hi, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chester Chidello.
This week, the only pollster who saw Trump's 2016 victory coming says he's actually winning again.
And Joe Biden's about to name his VP. We're going to look at some of the disastrous picks of the past. But first...
It began, as so many stories have in recent years, with a Trump tweet. Not for the first time, the president casting doubts over universal mail-in voting, warning that 2020 will be
the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history.
And then came the real eyebrow lifter when the president suggested America could
delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote.
Now, to put that in context, no US presidential election has ever been delayed. Not by the Civil War in 1864, not by the flu pandemic lingering into 1920, not by the Great Depression in 1932, not by the Second World War in 1944, and in 2016, not even the mannequin challenge stopped people voting. So what Trump is suggesting is pretty out there, but you know those Republican lick-spittles like Kevin McCarthy who always do what Trump wants.
No way should we ever not hold our election on the day that we have it.
Oh, and even diehards like Stephen Calabresi, the co-founder of the Federalist Society, who stood by Trump opposing the Mueller inquiry, opposed the impeachment over the Ukraine scandal. Even he has said he's frankly appalled by that presidential tweet, describing it as, quote, fascistic, calling for Trump's removal from office by the Senate. Democrat Majority Whip Jim Clyburn is also worried about what he sees as Trump's fascistic tendencies.
I feel very strongly that this man has taken on strong-arm tactics, and I feel very strongly that he is Mussolini, Putin is Hitler.
President Trump then tried to pivot away from the delay the election tweet by claiming that that was exactly the opposite of what he wants. He says, in fact, he's convinced that mail-in votes, which take longer to verify and count, will delay the election result being known.
I just feel I don't want to delay. I want to have the election. But I also don't want to have to wait for 3 months and then find out that the ballots are all missing and the election doesn't mean anything. That's what's going to happen, Steve. That's common sense. And everyone knows it.
Do they, though? At the end of the day, the date of the election is not set by the president anyway. An 1845 law stipulates it must be held on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. The only way to change that is with another law that has to pass the Democrat majority House and the Republican majority Senate. Basically, it ain't happening. And in case you're wondering why it's held on a Tuesday anyway, well, in 1845, they wanted to give voters, i.e. white males, many of them, farmers, time to finish their harvest, pray on the Sabbath, take their horse and buggy into town on the Monday in time to vote on the Tuesday. Make sense?
What a great reason to hold your election on a weekend in 2020.
Good for those farmers.
Yay! Look, this whole delaying election story is kind of pointless, but it did allow pretty much every senior Republican to be put on the record opposing it, which is useful in case the suggestion is more serious in 3 months' time. Like Marco Rubio here, we're going to have an election that's legitimate. It's going to be credible. It's going to be the same as we've always done it. We're going to have an election in November and people should have confidence in it. Perfect. I should say that according to Trump, he was just being a trickster. He tweeted, "Glad I was able to get the very dishonest lamestream media to finally start talking about the risks to our democracy from dangerous universal mail-in voting." He's referring presumably to risks like this.
You guys like to talk about Russia and China and other places? They'll be able to forge ballots, they'll forge them, they'll do whatever they have to do.
Now, I don't know what the chances are of forging, given every single county in America has different ballot forms with different info, different colours, different sizes, different fonts, different layouts, and most mail-in voting requires a personal signature that gets checked as well. In fact, Trump's own intelligence community's top election official and senior official friends briefed Congress this week, and they dismissed the possibility of foreign powers being able to interfere on a mass scale of fake ballots completely. So I don't know if Trump wants to talk about that, but I'll have much more to say about this exact topic next week. The forging concerns might be bogus, but some of Trump's mail-in critiques are more on the mark.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. Joe Biden, meanwhile, is getting very close to announcing his vice presidential running mate. He said it would be in the first week of August. That's now, although a number of reports have suggested that it may be pushed back by a few days or a week. He revealed in March his Veep would be a woman, effectively ruling out a Biden-Bernie unity ticket without upsetting too many Bernie bros and perhaps neutralising some of the allegations that Biden is a little bit handsy, or worse in the case of Tara Reid. Some still imagine a Biden-Warren ticket. That's not impossible, but in recent months there has been a growing expectation whoever it is will be a woman of colour. We talked last week about one of the names on Biden's shortlist, the former National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Another woman being given a serious look is Congresswoman Karen Bass, but she's hit a couple of roadblocks this week. The head of the Congressional Black Caucus has a long history of engagement with communist Cuba. She travelled there a number of times as a student in the 70s on humanitarian and housing projects, but in 2016, when former Cuban President Fidel Castro died, she said the passing of the Comandante en Jefe, Commander-in-Chief, is a great loss to the people of Cuba. Asked about those comments this week by Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, she said this.
I absolutely would have not put that statement out. And I will tell you that after talking to my colleagues who represent the state of Florida, raised those concerns with me, lesson learned, would not do that again for sure.
Late learner, it's a bit odd for somebody aged 66 to now distance themselves from something they said at the age of 61, and it's not going to go down well with Florida's Cuban expats and does play into Trump's narrative that Biden is just a socialist puppet. The Oppo researchers also dredged up these comments from 10 years ago of Karen Bass praising the Church of Scientology and its founder, L. Ron Hubbard, for their creed of equal rights. The Scientologists loved it so much, they put some happy music under it.
It's a remarkable credit to your church that this is part of your creed. The Church of Scientology, I know, has made a difference because your creed is a universal creed and one that speaks to all people everywhere.
It's pretty catchy. Karen Bass did say, look, she was just trying to find some common ground and to respect people's beliefs, but you rather suspect, Chaz, she didn't think she'd be in the running for VP 10 years after that.
Bingo. Although she did find some common ground, yeah, with 1980s game shows, that music. But to be fair, she isn't the first politician to implement that presentation technique.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you.
A powerful piece of rhetoric, John.
And electronica ahead of its time. Meanwhile, Senator Kamala Harris, who is also from California like Karen Bass and ran for the presidential nomination herself last year, has long been seen as the VP frontrunner in many eyes, although some reservations persist after her attack on Biden in last July's first candidate debate over his opposition to some forms of school desegregation in the 1970s. And some suspect her supporters are the ones that are trying to knock Karen Bass out at the moment with all this Oppo. Meanwhile, conservative websites like True Pundit suspect Kamala Harris has had a VP makeover with new face, teeth and, quote, lightened skin. Their sources, some people who say her skin is even lighter, and two people on Twitter watching her on TV who thought she looked a little different, maybe a facelift. For whoever Joe Biden chooses, Chaz, I guess they can almost certainly get ready for not just the sexism that Hillary Clinton faced 4 years ago, potentially combined with a good dose of the racism Barack Obama faced as well. This is going to be tough.
Yeah, some people like to say a lot of crap. The other issue that Karen Bass might face, by the way, was this quote of hers about the police reform debate. Defund the police is one of the worst slogans ever, she said. Can't imagine that thought would please everyone at the Democratic Party, but yeah. Oh, by the way, how would you be if you were Elizabeth Warren during all this? Biden wants someone who can be president on day 2? Check. He needs someone who can deal with the Senate? Check. We're in the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. She's an economics professor who has spent the last 20 years coming with populist yet economically feasible ideas. Check. This is supposed to be a corona election. Her brother died of the coronavirus. Check. She ticks an enormous number of boxes, yet right now, she's more of an afterthought than Karen Bass somehow.
Yeah, the boxes that she checks are not the right boxes for now, it seems. Let's have a look at the polls this week, and there are signs that President Trump is regaining a bit of ground that he lost in June and mid-July. Joe Biden's lead in the average of national polls, which had been nudging double digits, has slipped this week to 7.4 points. Less encouraging for President Trump, a weekend poll from YouGov that showed him trailing in both North Carolina and Georgia. Those are two states Biden doesn't need to win, but would be the icing on the cake. Other swing state polls this week showed Biden in front, including this one from Ohio, which had President Trump trailing by 4 in a state that he won by 8 points 4 years ago. But the margin may be narrowing a bit in some other places. Biden leading in Florida by 4, according to a Mason-Dixon poll. Biden holding a 9-point lead in Pennsylvania, that according to Franklin and Marshall. New Hampshire, a state that President Trump lost narrowly in 2016, but had hoped to swing this time, is now looking out of reach. Biden 13 points clear, according to a University of New Hampshire poll, and Trump is trailing by 11 points in Virginia, which is looking pretty safely Democratic these days after being a swing state for a number of election cycles there, Chairs.
Yeah, the polls seem to have closed up about, 2 points in the last few weeks. Now, maybe that's just reverting to an average margin of about 6 points, like happens sometimes, or maybe it's because of Trump's anti-crime campaign. It's starting to resonate, possibly. Remember, in 23 of America's biggest cities, murder is up 23% this year, although admittedly overall crime is down 7%. We just don't know what's going on with the polling at the moment. But I would just note, if you look at the average approval of Trump's handling of the corona crisis, that is still slowly falling. Now it's down to 37%. And if you split that up by partisan leaning, corona handling approval from independents has fallen 5 points in the last few months. Even approval from Republicans has dropped 6 points in the last few months, so watch out for that.
Yeah. Now, here's another potentially crucial swing state poll. Michigan. Joe Biden is leading by almost 8 points in the average of polls, but according to our guest this week, that could be painting a rather misleading picture, not just in Michigan, but of the entire 2020 race. For one thing, he says that Michigan is basically a tie right now. Robert Cahaley's Trafalgar polling firm was the only one to show Trump leading in Michigan before his victory there 4 years ago, and one of the very few to show Trump leading in Pennsylvania. He also won there. Part of the problem for pollsters, they believe, is that Trump voters are stigmatised and therefore a bit shy about admitting their support to most pollsters. Robert Cahaley, welcome to Planet America.
It's good to be here.
So tell us, how did you identify the shy Trump voter?
We look at kind of like it's a three-legged stool. The first is we reject traditional polling. The idea that you can call 30, 40 questions, you can call someone and give them 30 or 40 questions is insane. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who, if they got a call at 7 o'clock at night, would stop what they're doing and answer 30 questions and spend 20 minutes on the phone. No one does. So you have to answer your first question is, who are these people who have this kind of time? And what the answer it always comes back to be is these people are either in a pre-certified poll taker universe, which means they really like politics, or they're people who are on the extremes, if you're actually calling voters, that are on the extreme of opinion on either side. So step one is shorter political surveys. Step two is, who do you call? We try to call a different universe than a lot of people do. We try to look for voters that we feel for whatever reason are going to be motivated. And we built a model. We said, all right, if somebody shares, like I think it was 11 or 12 of these 57 characteristics, we're going to consider them a possible voter. But the third most important way to identify the hidden voters is understand, in the day and age where we have now, where people are being kind of shamed for their opinions and people are being doxxed and they're being completely ridiculed on social media and elsewhere, and in some places canceled, what are the odds if she's for Trump, she's going to say so? I would tell you she's not.
Robert, why would there be more shy voters now than in the past? What's changed, if anything?
That one's easy. 4 years ago, the worst they were called was deplorable. Now you can be called all kinds of names that are just horrible to be called. People make assumptions because someone says they're for Trump. They assume all of the worst things that are said about Trump must exist in that person. We ask a series of other questions. In 2016, we asked the neighbor question. How do you think most of your neighbors are voting? And that's how we kind of figured out who the shy Trump ones were versus the ones that were giving their first answer, and we saw what the difference was. And we did that again in 2018. It's one of the reasons we were one of the only firms that got Florida correctly, because there was a shy vote in the governor's race in Florida, but not a shy vote in the Senate race. And so when there's a politically correct choice to make, and you're not for the politically correct choice, people have learned to kind of keep their mouth shut. Because in America, we've seen people who express their opinions, lose their jobs and things a lot worse.
So, Robert, in your view right now, is there another November surprise brewing? Is Trump doing much better than most polls are suggesting?
Oh, yes. It won't be a surprise to us, as it wasn't a surprise 4 years ago when we predicted 306 to 232, which ended up being right. I would tell you if the election were today, he would still win the Electoral College by at least 4%, by 4 votes on the Electoral College. But I think it is probably set to get better. And when we're talking about cancel culture, when we're talking about taking down statues, when we're talking about defunding police and we're talking about mob violence in the streets, Donald Trump is winning.
And do you think there could be some kind of tipping point if these shy Trump voters are seeing all the polls going very solidly against him, that they could just simply become Trump non-voters, not turn up to vote because they're convinced that Biden's going to win? I
actually think no. So many of them report that they have felt bottled up in their inability to express their opinions without retribution on social media, at work, and even with some of their more casual friends. This is their outlet. This is the place that they get to go behind that curtain and express that opinion, and they want to go so bad they can't stand it. On the other hand, and this is why I say to those on the Democrat side and Biden's campaign, guys, I'm your Paul Revere. This thing is not as wide open as you think it is. This is a real race, and you need to get serious, because Biden voters, especially young people who think Biden's going to win easy, they're the ones who are going to be overconfident and not vote. They are actually working against the Biden campaign by doing this, even though they don't believe it.
Robert Cahaly, thank you very much for joining us on Planet America.
Good to talk to you.
Now, if Robert Cahaly is wrong and the majority of polls are right, whoever Joe Biden announces as his running mate is likely to become the next Vice President of the United States, and she could very well go on to become America's first female president. So there is a lot at stake in this announcement, and a lot that can go wrong. History suggests the vice presidential nominee can help a candidate a bit, but they can also hurt a lot. The right choice can provide balance to a ticket, maybe help win an important state like Lyndon Johnson did in Texas in 1960 for Jack Kennedy.
We want a country moving ahead here at home.
It can help unite a party, bringing ideological balance, the more moderate George Bush running with the more conservative Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 84. It can even make up for a perceived lack of experience, as Joe Biden did for Barack Obama in 2008 and Mike Pence did for Donald Trump 4 years ago. All in all, it is hard to quantify the positive impact of a strong running mate. A weak one, though, can be more obvious. The nightmare scenario for any presidential candidate became very real for Democratic nominee George McGovern in 1972, running against President Richard Nixon. It was an uphill battle made steeper by a party bitterly divided over the issue of the Vietnam War. McGovern asked several prominent Democrats to join his ticket. They all turned him down. He finally picked moderate Senator Tom Eagleton from Missouri. McGovern's team didn't have much time for vetting. Eagleton assured them there were no problems, and the pair hit the campaign trail.
We know we can't win it alone. We know we can win it if we have your support. Thank you very much.
But within days, reports emerged Eagleton had been hospitalised with depression and treated for alcohol abuse. He'd also received electric shock therapy. At first, McGovern stood by Eagleton.
I'm not quitting. I'm not getting out. We're going to win this election, and I'm going to be the next Vice President of the United States.
Debate raged about whether Tom Eagleton was fit to serve. Within 3 weeks of his nomination, McGovern dumped his running mate in favour of Peace Corps founder Sergeant Shriver.
I am fully confident of his ability to serve as Vice President of the United States.
But the damage was done by the hasty choice and the backflip. McGovern and Shriver lost in a landslide.
And I accept the challenge.
More than 3 decades later, another VP pick backfired almost as badly. In 2008, Republican nominee John McCain was looking for something to shake things up. He was losing to the first African-American presidential nominee, Barack Obama. McCain needed a game changer. At first, he thought that would be announcing his running mate would be Joe Lieberman, a Democrat who'd been Al Gore's running mate 8 years earlier. But the Republican Party scotched that idea. McCain was 72 years old and a cancer survivor. His VP could become president. They'd be handing the keys of the White House to their rival party. So McCain tried to match Obama's history-making campaign with only the second ever female vice presidential nominee, the little-known governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin. And at first, picking the folksy outsider looked like a masterstroke.
I love those hockey moms. You know, they say the difference between a hockey mom and a pit bull? Lipstick.
And I'll let Governor Palin speak for herself.
In fact,
but Palin soon wilted under intense media scrutiny. She did not look ready to be president and was ridiculed for claiming foreign policy experience based on Alaska's border with Russia.
What insight into Russian actions, particularly in the last couple of weeks, does the proximity of the state give you?
They're our next door neighbors, and you can actually see Russia from land here in Alaska.
And I can see Russia from my house.
It's funny that a comment like that was kind of made to, I don't know, you know, reporters.
Mocked.
Yeah, mocked, I guess that's the word, yeah.
The choice of Palin made McCain look reckless. Other running mates have been a drag on candidates as well, without necessarily proving fatal, like Dan Quayle on the ticket with George Bush in 1988.
I mean, we all lived in this century. I didn't live in this century, but in this century's history.
And Vice President Spiro Agnew's tax evasion and resignation certainly added to the stench of corruption around Richard Nixon over Watergate.
A Justice Department statement submitted to federal court in Baltimore as Agnew pleaded no contest to evading taxes in 1967, detailed in 40 pages evidence of, quote, a pattern of substantial cash payments to Agnew.
So campaigns have generally become better at looking into possible skeletons in a VP's closet.
So help me God.
The vetting process for shortlisted candidates is extensive. Their health, financial, political and personal histories are poured over. Right now, Joe Biden is winning. At the age of 77, he does need somebody ready to step in if required. That threshold test, is the person qualified to be president, is likely to be strictly applied. His choice will tell us more as well about what else he thinks he needs, not just to win, but to govern. The old axiom will probably still apply. First, do no harm. There are now 90 days to go until the US presidential election, although early voting is getting underway in some states in around 5 or 6 weeks from now. Time now, though, to get an update on the coronavirus pandemic in the US. Chaz, what is the latest?
New cases have been trending down recently from around 70,000 a day down to around 60,000 a day. That's good. Better, though, is that the deaths per day may finally be levelling off as well. And with hospitalisations also falling, America may have seen off the worst of this mini spike. We should remember, though, the real second wave isn't expected for at least another 6 weeks, so that might be still to come. Trump's been doing laps of honour anyway, comparing America to us. He's noted Victoria's situation, declaring big China virus breakouts all over the world. And that's true, but remember, corona breakouts are relative. If we take Victoria's record new cases today of 725 and express that as new cases per million people, if Victoria was a US state, it would rank at number 26 for outbreak severity, with some states seeing over 3 times as many new cases per million people as Victoria is seeing at its peak. This is the point that Corona Task Force Director Dr. Birx has been making. Corona is still spreading.
What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas. And to everybody who lives in a rural area, you are not immune or protected from this virus.
And that's best illustrated by how the states with the most cases have changed. Back in April, New York had the most cases in total. Now it's 4th. New Jersey has gone from 2nd to 6th. California, though, has gone from 3rd to 1st. and Florida and also Texas have jumped into second and third positions. Meanwhile, Michigan, Louisiana, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania have all dropped right off and been replaced by the more southern Georgia, Arizona and North Carolina. Meanwhile, Congress still hasn't extended their economic support for the country, which has now run out. They're still arguing about whether to extend the $600 weekly bonus for unemployed people, although to give the administration credit, they were prepared to extend the $600 per week payments for 4 months. It was the Democrats who rejected that offer, insisting on at least extending the $600 through to March next year. So in this case, it's the Democrats playing hardball. Although, unfortunately, no one told the White House spokesperson, Hogan Gidley, that the White House had conceded to the $600 payments. He was right in the middle of trashing them when a Fox News host had to set him straight.
The government has now come up with this universal wage, and it's making them, the workers, not want to get off the couch and come back to work. And why would you? If the government's paying you more than the business, then your job would.
But the White House now supports the $600. But the White House supports the $600 now.
I'm sorry, in what way?
The White House just came out and said they support the $600.
Right. But the Democrats want way more than that amount for the American people. And also, this is like the fourth or fifth tranche of money. We're talking about trillions of dollars we've actually spent to try and keep this country open to allow the American people some form of relief.
Nice try, Hogan. Very smooth.
Slick. A new battlefront in the US trade war with China opened this week. The meme-making video app TikTok. President Trump announced that he wanted to ban the Chinese-owned service. He says he has concerns over privacy and data security. We might let one of TikTok's biggest stars, Sarah Cooper, do that clip.
We may be banning TikTok. We may be doing some other things. There are a couple of options, but a lot of things are happening. So we'll see what happens. But we are looking at a lot of alternatives with respect to TikTok.
One of those alternatives is encouraging Microsoft to buy the US arm of TikTok. In fact, the app is already banned from the phones of US government employees, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been warning about it for weeks.
Would you recommend that people download that app on their phones?
Only if you want your private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
Pompeo went to a little more detail about his concerns as well.
Feeding data directly to the Chinese Communist Party, their national security apparatus, could be their facial recognition pattern. It could be information about their residents, their phone numbers, their friends, who they're connected to.
I'm not sure why China would particularly want the private info of 12-year-old girls who like to dance, but sure. Still, I can't help wondering why Trump is so concerned about TikTok. It's almost like he has a dark secret. They should have used Karen Bass's Scientology music.
Fake news. Meanwhile, Chaz, the long-running Black Lives Matter protests in Portland, Oregon, have suddenly gone from riots a week ago to all's quiet tonight. Has President Trump's intervention with federal forces paid off?
That's one possible interpretation, John. Another would be that the federal agents were acting as a honeypot for antagonism, and so when the federal agents stepped down, the activists got over it a bit. Certainly, in the days immediately after the feds left, the police said that the protests remained peaceful throughout the night. And in fact, when some people lit fires along the sidewalks, other protesters put the fires out. And when some people climbed the courthouse protective fence, other protesters admonished them and got them down. Although one wonders how the police know this if they weren't actually there.
Two big differences that I want to point out. This crowd is a little bit smaller and things are just generally more peaceful. Also, we have seen zero law enforcement throughout the entire night, state or federal.
Now, in the last couple of days, there's been a little more aggression, with activists throwing bottles and directing lasers at police again. But it can't be that bad. And I'll tell you why. Because conservative media have had to make stuff up to try to scare people. Like the New York Post's Portland woman shot in hail of 150 bullets during Black Lives Matter protest. Firstly, None of the police reports indicate this had anything to do with protests or activists at all. It was just a random crime. Also, it took place at a different time to the protests and over 2 miles away from where the protests were located. So the fact that dodgy journos have had to work that hard to make Portland look scary, that is a good sign the protests may be under control for now.
It's Beauty and the Geek, CEO edition. Dates with the hottest nerds in America. Meet Mark from Facebook. This tantalising techie is sure to be a hit with your gullible aunties.
So, what do you like to do, Mark?
From connecting with friends privately, to connecting with people in communities, to connecting with all your friends at once, to connecting with all kinds of user-generated content.
You might need to loosen up a bit there, Mark. Like, how would you define love?
A subset of the overall space of connecting that we exist in.
Okay. Now, it says here that humans are 70% water, but you are 89% water. Is that true?
You know, I want to do better than 89%. I'd like to get that to 99%.
Mark, are you an alien?
So yes.
Called it, yeah.
Then there's Jeff from Amazon. His net worth may be high, but your net worth is more, cause he's a catch.
So Jeff, what would you get a girl for her birthday?
Netflix is one example, Hulu is another, and so on.
Jeff, you're literally the richest man in the world. What are you even doing with your money? You're not trying to like spend money curing baldness, are you? Jeff?
I can't answer that question, yes or no.
Oh my God, you are. Didn't you see that article in the Wall Street Journal, Jeff?
I'm familiar with the Wall Street Journal article that you're talking about. I'm not yet satisfied that we've gotten to the bottom of it, and we're going to keep looking at it.
Beauty and the Geek, CEO edition.
Okay, so thank you. That's for the meal. How much do you two want to tip? I actually hate you guys. Like, you're actually bad people.
And for now, Chaz, that is all the time we have for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next Wednesday night or anytime you like on iView, Facebook and YouTube.
And we'll be having a fireside chat on Friday with former National Security Advisor John Bolton. He says Donald Trump's unfit for office. But what's he going to do about it?
Nothing. Good night.
See ya.